Hello, ladies and gents. Hagbard Celine here on my potato fucking laptop just for the fuck of it because I got frustrated. I'm just gonna speak frankly, I got frustrated. I found a feminist's, midterm fall thing. It's, it's painful. Now, before I start this, I'd just like to clarify. I myself used to work in the field of, the mentally and physically handicapped, and many people in my family are either nursing staff or similar things like that. I come from something of a medical background. Now, when I hear someone say the word ableist, it makes my head hurt. Now, obviously, one does not wander around in society and treat people who are mentally or physically unwell as lesser people. We stopped doing that a long time ago. However, admitting that someone who is severely cerebral palsy and can't get out of their wheelchair can't be a bag boy, well, that's just fact. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I just want to start this video. Here she is. This beautiful, made-up, Western white feminist, right here. Gorgeous, right? I like the lipstick she made sure she had on, and the subtle eye makeup. None of that's a mistake, it's just, she would hate to admit that she did it because getting on camera without it would be horrifying to her. Well, here we go.
Today I wanted to address the close relation and intersection of ableism, whether directed towards the mentally or physically disabled, with feminism, racism, and capitalism.
Of course you do. You always conflate those three issues, like somehow racism, being disabled, and capitalism are related, aside from the fact that it's really hard for someone with a physical or severe mental disability to make money in a capitalist system. Which, I mean, is unfortunate, but what the fuck do you intend to do about that?
I want to begin with discussing the treatment of the mentally disabled women, in this particular case, white and middle class women.
Why? Why in this particular case white middle class women, and why not men? Why not the treatment of mentally disabled men? You know there are a lot of mentally ill and mentally disabled men too, right?
In historical context, gender was completely absent in the discussion on mental disability.
Well, that was a bit of a privilege, wasn't it? We didn't even acknowledge the fact that you could be mentally ill. We just said, well, women fluctuate in their emotions. Men, however, if they do that, they deserve to be locked up, institutionalized, and, you know, whatever else happens to them in there.
In fact, women were not included in diagnoses of mental disability until the late 19th century.
When finally we came to our senses and realized that women could be as crazy as men.
At which time a new category was created for the mentally disabled that applied specifically to women: female moral imbecility.
So we were still trying to sugarcoat it, basically.
Leisha Carlson, writer of the article Cognitive Ableism and Disability Studies, states moral imbecility included the ability to bear illegitimate children, which at that time added a sense of urgency and danger to this type. Women
Do you not see how backwards it is to have to go back to the 18th century or 1800s to find some evidence for why this is a problem? You're going back all the way to the early 1900s, late 1800s. This isn't an issue. This has ceased to be an issue for a significant period of time, but for some reason you feel the need to drudge it back up as though it had some impact on modern society. You've lost your minds.
with considered moral imbecility were then associated, because of their thought tendency to birth illegitimate children, with prostitution and crime.
It was also linked with poverty. You see, you're ignoring that for some reason, I'm not sure why, and you're also ignoring the fact that men were jailed for the exact same crimes. Well, not jailed. I consider it jailed, but really they were institutionalized. We were real institution happy.
If mental deficiency was transmissible from one generation to the next,
Which genetically, for many, many mental and physical conditions, it fucking is.
then it was of utmost importance that the feeble-minded not be allowed to procreate, writes Carlson. This led to the sterilizing of disabled women, whether medically or by putting them in all-female institutions from the time they were of childbirthing age.
Well, in that case, the Catholic Church sterilized hundreds of women by putting them in nunneries. I mean, that's asinine. That's not sterilization. That's simply segmentation of a population that probably shouldn't breed. People with Downs probably shouldn't attempt to breed. People with severe mental and cognitive disorders can indeed pass those on to their offspring, and they should be wary of that.
for life. Carlson also adds women, as the symbols of procreative power, were particularly dangerous. Particularly dangerous as the creators of potentially morally questionable laborers.
Okay, you're using the term laborers to link it to capitalism. Just people. And by morally, in the Victorian sense, you meant mentally. These are people that just could not function in society. I mean, how else does one define insane? How else does one define a non-functional individual? I don't understand what your alternatives are because you never offer them. None of you ever do. You simply say, we should treat these people better, and they shouldn't be forced to be marginalized in a system, but how does one take someone who physically can't get out of a wheelchair and not marginalize them in some way, shape, or form? They physically can't get out of the wheelchair. They can do whatever they want. Some of the most genius programmers, some of the most brilliant human beings on Earth are in wheelchairs and can't get out of them. However, they still can't do a simple task like tie shoes or bag groceries. Is that ableist to say that? I mean, you've lost your mind.
Laborers that would not end up doing their duties as dictated. Laborers that, in the Victorian eye, would ultimately end up leading a life of crime.
Well, because they would, and because crime has been linked to mental instability. Do you guys read multiple studies or just like a couple books?
Feeble-mindedness, as it was called, was completely subjective as well, simply relating to and depending on the dominant moral codes and expectations of that time. The social confines that women, particularly these mentally disabled or considered mentally disabled women, were put into became increasingly stringent.
Again, why have we gone back to the 1800s to talk about this? It has nothing to do with modern times whatsoever, dear. Nothing whatsoever.
Women had absolutely no choice but to perform sexually, socially, and in all their life choices in a very particular way.
Listen, so did men, first and foremost, and secondarily, all of these groups bent their social construct rules. This is just what human beings do. We set up, I don't know why, but we set up a rule, and then our youth then break it. That's kind of the thing. Like, that has been the pattern of humanity century after century. And you try and minimize the damage to a society that can be done when one breaks the mores by forming new mores. Now, you guys seem obsessed with breaking mores without actually having a plan for the next step. This makes me nervous.
With life imprisonment to fear if they did not. This is the reason why disabled people are so celebrated when they get married and do capitalist, normal people things.
No, it's not. As someone that's worked with these groups and worked with the people that work with these groups, they're celebrated because they want to be celebrated. They're happy. They're happy to be viewed as normal. Now, regardless of what you think about these populations know without a shadow of a doubt that upon first glance they can usually be told as not being, quote-unquote, the norm or normal. And of course, we don't put the same social, emotional, or economic stigmas on someone who cannot fulfill, for some mental or physical reason, those cultural needs. You're making a wild leap from the 1800s until now and simply saying, well, those mores haven't changed at all. They fucking have.
They are constantly expected in this day and age to reaffirm their normalcy. That's why queer disabled people are invisible, because they're not doing their part to be accepted by neurotypicals in the way that they are supposed to. Deviating that far from the neurotypical straight cis norm in behavior, lifestyle, ability, and thought process makes it easy to dehumanize them.
Well, I love that you're sitting here reading your actual term paper and still you sound like a complete lunatic. None of what you have said is anything but a combination of buzzwords. Other than that, it's either one hand is, of course we don't willfully and knowledgeably marginalize and dehumanize people that are functioning in society. That's a given. But unfortunately, you would just like us to just go, okay, everyone, no matter what their disability, no matter what their actual, by the way, disability meaning actual abilities, we should just assume that they're capable of doing these things. It'll be fine. It'll be totally fine.
They do not present themselves and their ideas in a way that is culturally intelligible.
Or just intelligible. Some of these people are schizophrenic and they will say things that make no sense whatsoever. I'm not sure what your solution to that would be, as that would be the definition of culturally unintelligible. However, you seem obsessed with the concept that our culture is somehow evil. Now, this is where it gets weird.
The only option that we offer these culturally unintelligible people is to assimilate to a white, capitalist, abled, cis, heterosexual society.
Okay, you explain to me how any society would continue to move forward if at least a couple of those weren't the case. How does an entire society of quote-unquote non-neurotypical human beings get along? As a matter of fact, how does a society of quote-unquote non-cis, non-hetero people continue for more than a couple generations? What you're saying doesn't make sense. What is the norm is the genetic norm. I don't know what your alternative would be other than to force people who are quote-unquote genetically normal to act or be genetically non-normal. You hate your own genetics. I'm not sure why, considering you attack nothing but cisgendered heteronormative whiteness, and you appear to be the epitome of cisgendered heteronormative whiteness. I think we're running into the ultimate case of white guilt here.
If a group that is different from this reigning norm agrees to take on the characteristics of their oppressors, society can then be a little more comfortable seeing them as humans.
Society does see them as humans. It makes us wildly uncomfortable that we beat the odds game. That's the root of that's the root of why most people kick back against people that are physically or mentally disabled. That's why they avoid them. It makes them uncomfortable. It's like facing death. That was an odd. You could have been that odd. You could have been that statistic. Now simply saying that that's wrong is bizarre.
Once this marginalized group has agreed to assimilate, society can use these normal characteristics they've taken on to de-queer and personify the group. If mentally disabled people are not having normal, straight, cis people productive capitalist sex,
Nobody cares. I've worked in homes of these people. I've lived around these people my whole life. No one cares what kind of sex they're having. At all. Many relationships are encouraged regardless of their sexuality. These people are human, and the people that work with them fucking know that. It's you people that are denying them that agency.
if they are not assimilating, they're not human.
Bullshit. If they are not assimilating, they are simply not assimilating. Just like, I don't know, me. I'm not assimilating super well. And I'm a cisgendered heteronormative white man. What does that say about my fucked up society?
I'm thinking on queer as a verb, to shake up the order, to make something, as we can say, culturally unintelligible.
Okay, cool it, honey. This is you reading your fucking term paper to the internet, not a TED Talks. This isn't TEDx.
To denormify. So I'm going to be using queer as a verb for a lot of this video.
Because I know how you and your ilk love to redefine words simply to fit your narratives.
That's why in an article on takepart.com, a couple prepares to say, "I do" in first ever all autism wedding by Samantha Cohen. The couple is white and all-American, charmingly donning cowboy hats in their photo, reaffirming and insisting upon the point that they are just like us being the default in society, white, straight, cis, abled, married couples.
I can almost guarantee that nowhere in that article did it ever use the phrase "just like us." That's insane. It's not been used for quite a long time. Simply an article you found celebrating an autistic wedding of two people that happened to be white is bizarre. It's mega bizarre that you would protest that on the grounds that what, they're white or they're straight. What exactly is the problem here? I mean, that's insane.
Additionally, the aforementioned couple is upper middle class,
God forbid.
presumably sexual, and undeniably romantic.
God, that is just evil. It's everything that's evil with society in one. Two autistic people that are capable of finding love. God, that is just awful.
This is the autistic couple they're featuring. Yes, they're autistic, so it's queer, but not too queer.
Yeah, well, luckily I know a whole lot of autistic people that are interested in sexuality as a whole. That's a normal trait of the autistic, is to be just sexually active as hell, one way or the other. Jesus, you don't know anything about the subjects you're talking about, do you?
It's still heartwarming and seemingly progressive,
But not good enough for you, because nothing ever is good enough for you.
without actually moving forward the acceptance of the majority of disabled people.
The majority of disabled people couldn't give a fuck about what you're talking about. The majority of disabled people wouldn't A, know, and B, give a fuck about the garbage you're talking about. Their quality of life is what they care about.
Instead, it merely teaches society that there is a certain kind of acceptable disabled person who performs in a very digestible way.
No, that appears to be what you've internalized. What it was a feel-good fucking story that you guys have taken and twisted to your own agenda.
And completely leaves out the rest of the majority of disabled people who cannot or choose not to perform in this specific way.
No, it doesn't. You're reading into that. It's the same argument in reverse that you use to deny the fact that people are angry about forced diversity. You say, oh, just because that person is represented does not mean you're not represented. And then you turn around and use the same goddamn argument. Just because another person is being represented does not mean that they are quote-unquote not representing or dismissing people that don't fit that paradigm. Or does it not go both ways, honey?
In cognitive ableism and disability studies on feeble-minded women, the text only focused on the stigmatized sexuality of middle-class white women. For black women in that time, their sexuality was already thought of as primal, and the ability to produce illegitimate children in terms of moral imbecility was not even an abnormality worthy of institutionalization.
Again, we have gone all the way back to the 1800s. I mean, maybe 1907. These views were held. And you're just going to go ahead and make those as though they were the norm for a long period of time. We're talking like 25, 30 years in human history that eugenics was popular and these theories were held. But no, let's just act like that's the norm, that's just how we've always viewed it. For the record, the moral imbecility thing when it comes to quote-unquote white middle-class women had to do with reporting from their husbands. Reporting from society as a whole. So in lower middle class, lower income African American regions, their husbands didn't report impropriety in the same way. They, I'm sure, had their own social ways to control impropriety. But I'm certain you don't want to discuss those.
In this time, both mentally disabled women and black women were sterilized, imprisoned, assaulted, and historically invisible.
So were mentally ill people in general, the vast majority of which in these time periods were men. The vast majority. But of course, let's just ignore the fact that these people were experimented upon and used as chattel. But I'm sure, comet strikes Earth, women and gays affected the most. Do go on.
The stigmatized aspect of the sexuality of white middle-class women in the Victorian times was in many ways just a deviance from the system created to dehumanize black women and their sexualities.
That doesn't even make sense, considering what you actually have described as black women having a higher sexual agency as defined by modern feminists, and middle-class white women as being the reason why feminism exists because they wanted to re-embrace their sexualities. But you don't see it that way. For some reason, no matter what happens in reality, no matter what really is understood, what you see is the constant dehumanization of people of color and the constant regality of white women. I wonder why you would feel you're so regal, dear made-up white woman.
And in turn excuse any violence done unto them. The white female sexuality, pure, submissive, available but not too available.
Yeah, you misunderstand Victorian era entirely if you think that was what we were dealing with then.
Demure, chaste, etc., was placed side by side with the black female sexuality, primitive, wild, hyper-promiscuous, animalistic, constantly available, in order to contrast and bolster the white female sexuality.
Again, you're saying that a brief period of time during which this propaganda was popularized equals all of time. And you do realize that what you've described as quote-unquote Victorian black women's sexuality is kind of what feminism's been arguing for, right?
This is an example of the concept called Western metaphysical dualism. In other words, there is good and there is bad.
There is good and there is bad.
There is white and there is black.
Well, these are two colors on a spectrum in which they would be held as opposites depending on whether we're talking about refractive or combinative qualities. Go on.
When a white woman deviates from this sexual presentation, she is complicating the expected stereotype of her sexuality and, consequently, complicating the dehumanization of black women.
Not so much. What was actually going on was that men were essentially defending their rights to the women and the breeding rights therein they had earned in their given societies, and these women were deviating from their socially and contractually obligated goals. Now, if that makes you uncomfortable, that's between you and the 18th century. I had fuck all to do with that.
Um, Disability isn't profitable to capitalism.
Disability isn't profitable to anyone, including up to and including the disabled. What the fuck is your point?
In fact, it detracts profit, as many disabled people of both physical and mental disability are not able to work or choose not to work for reason of harassment.
No, most of them simply can't work. Those that can desperately attempt to. But thank you for saying that people who are mentally disabled choose not to work because they're weak.
Sarah Blahovic writes, for persons with disabilities, issues can run from passive-aggressive comments about missing work due to illness to slurs about an obvious disability. Disabled people are also expensive to accommodate. Blahovic adds, these challenges complicate the 9-to-5 work schedule with everything from routine infusions to spontaneous hospitalizations. This requires employers to be flexible and to understand that performance should be valued over time on the clock.
Well, what if the time on the clock is directly related to performance? What if it's a job that, requires you be there to do it, God forbid?
Individuals with disabilities have to recognize their limits as overtaxing themselves, such as through working 6-hour work week, could lead to a negative impact on their health.
Luckily for us able-bodied people, working a 60-hour work week is completely fine. It has no negative effects on our health, mental or physical. You fucking nutball.
This means that disabled people who cannot work to this extent simply cannot produce goods at the same rate as an able worker.
Thus will not be compensated at the same rate. Again, I'm sorry if that makes you uncomfortable, but guess what? If I'm a completely able-bodied fuckwit, and I'm incapable of producing the same amount as my well-to-do and capable fuckwit, then guess what? He's going to make more money than me. Them's the rules of the game. If you have another set of rules that will function in the similar way that we have, please fucking present them. Because otherwise what you're asking for is chaos.
In fact, in that line of thinking, disabled people are altogether useless to capitalism. This message is sent out directly to parents of disabled children. No, unfortunately, it is unlikely that your child will be able to carry out this American dream. Your child is not desirable. Your child is not hireable. Your child will never be a productive part of capitalism. They will not find happiness, which amounts ultimately to being useful and further endorsing the capitalist system.
Okay, let me explain something real fast, because I'm not like an avid capitalist, but I do understand that it actually is an expression of natural human interactions, as opposed to some system that has been set up to oppress people. We need to check the natural urges that have led to capitalism. You can't just say capitalism itself is evil. To say that someone who is mentally ill or physically disabled is simply useless to capitalism is to detract from all of the people that have mental and physical disabilities and have gone on to lead full and productive lives. What you have now done is say that the entire group of mentally and physically disabled people has just been marginalized. It simply is non-productive because the system says so. What you're claiming the system has done, you have actually done. What the system says is show me the money. Show me what the fuck you can do. Now, I hate to tell you this, but if you simply can't do anything, that's sad. And we will help you, and we will take care of you, because that's how evil capitalism is. Because we bred it and we understand we did that. We're part of that, and we can't just do the ancient Greek thing and throw you off a cliff. We've moved beyond that. We need to be able to absorb that. And I have supported that my entire life. But you simply saying all mentally disabled people are equal is completely insane. all physically disabled people are equal, that's completely insane. You must know that. You must know that we're talking about an entire spectrum of people, from mild to severe. Now, if you show me someone with a severe physical and mental disorder that can, I don't know, tie their own shoes, do you see the problem? It has nothing to do with production. It has to do with actually being able to maintain oneself. But you don't see that. You just see this as an entire patriarchal, white, cis, capitalist, yada 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 buzzword bullshit.
If your child is not even able passing, or semi-able passing,
You mean doesn't look normal? I mean, what does that even mean?
they are not human.
Oh no, they're well human, and most people treat them as such, if not better than they would their normative allies. You've never worked with these people, have you?
He may as well be dead, as was said by Catherine Maurice, author of a book on autism treatment, ironically titled Let Me Hear Your Voice. She also likens autism to cancer, and applied behavioral analysis, an abusive technique of normalizing autistic social behaviors.
Okay, now we've gotten really offensive. Applied behavior analysis is not an abusive technique. It is an incredibly effective technique of stopping people's negative behaviors. What would you have us do when these kids tantrum? What would you have us do when these kids are completely not... Are you familiar with the actual bottom-end behavioristic characteristics of an autistic person? Not the semi-functional, I'm talking bottom-end, flapping their arms, non-verbal autism. You don't appear to know anything the fuck about that. You equate applied behavior analysis to abuse. You are an abortion of a human being.
As the necessary chemotherapy, writes Ariane Zurcher. Needless to say, disabled children are told they are unappealing and inconvenient from day one.
No, they're not. I grew up around these people. I was raised in this environment, and I helped a good deal. These people are not told that they are undesirable or less than human. However, many of them come to understand their own disabilities. This is not a problem. This is like me understanding my own limitations.
Disability is not sexy. You can't sell disability on the cover of a magazine and expect it to be mass appeal.
Then how is it that so many times we get all kinds of legislation for this if it's not sexy? Explain to me why it's a fucking breeze to get this kind of legislation passed as opposed to more cisgendered, heteronormative legislation, if you will. Because we all recognize that disabled people need help.
This is all the more harmful to disabled women, as in this society, a woman's appeal to a man is what defines her worth.
So now you're going to say that disabled women have it the worst because they can't find sexual partners? I'm sure that males with disability just get laid all the time, right?
That means that a disabled woman is considered worthless on two counts. She is worthless both as a disabled person in the workplace, and she is worthless as a woman who is not appealing on account of her disability.
Again, luckily that has absolutely no bearing on disabled men. You selfish twat.
This view of disabled women as unattractive makes them exponentially more susceptible to sexual assault. For disabled women who require caretakers, they are already at risk to be taken advantage of. But this idea that disabled women are undesirable, ugly, repulsive, even humorous in their lack of appeal, makes their sexual assault easier to apologize for.
Citation sorely fucking needed. You show me one instance in the mental health field where a man abused a mentally ill woman and got no repercussions. This isn't a thing. It's a very self-policing field. We recognize the vulnerability of the populations we work with, you twat. We know these things. And we also recognize the fact that mentally disabled men get sexually assaulted. Because sadly enough, the Forrest Gump-ism is somewhat true. And what God takes away upstairs, he tends to put downstairs. And some women can't control themselves when presented with such a glorious symbol of masculinity. But of course, you don't want to discuss that. That makes you wildly fucking uncomfortable, you selfish bitch.
For example, the frequent comment on a rape victim being unattractive is, "You're lucky someone wanted to have sex with you."
Okay, again, citation needed. If anybody said that to another individual publicly, they would be attacked, and always have been. It has never been a nod-off joke to say, well, an ugly woman got raped, fuck her, at least she got some attention. Jesus Christ, what happened to your brain?
Additionally, you cannot advertise a disabled body on the cover of a travel pamphlet and expect that there will be a great increase in tourism of the country.
Well, that's a given, because when it comes to advertising standards, we come to, again, concepts of norm. Now, you don't like concepts of norm, but sadly the statistics don't bear you out. And your average person with the income to travel or go on a vacation, not physically or mentally disabled. I'm sorry that makes you sad. Reality is reality.
Nor tourism of the body advertised. Embedded here are powerful signifiers about appropriate sexuality, about the kind of sexuality that presumably imperils the nation, and about the kind of sexuality that promotes citizenship. Not just any body can be a citizen anymore, for some bodies have been marked by the state of Trinidad and Tobago as non-procreative, in pursuit of sex only for pleasure, a sex that is non-productive of babies and of no economic gain.
So why exactly did you bring up Trinidad? That has fuck all to do with us, you know that, right? Like, what a regressive third world regime or whatever does to their country has fuck all to do with capitalism, you know that, right? Like, what Saudi Arabia does has very, very little to do with us. I mean, what you would consider capitalism as a whole, as I think you just think the West. I don't know why. I don't think why you'd think the East or the Middle East or South America treats these people better. But I think you probably do because brown people. That's just my guess, though. But Jesus, you're so backwards.
From Not Just Any Body Can Be a Citizen by M. J. Alexander. The system and the norm enforced are not necessarily exclusively for the moral issue of non-productive sex itself, but rather for one, the economic value and the productivity of the sex. Lesbianism and homosexuality are outlawed in Trinidad and Tobago and the Barbados, less for any sort of moral or amoral standing, but rather for the image that it projects. For poor countries such as these, tourism is a good fraction of the income. For white tourists to find the countries appealing to visit, there is an expectation of black respectability, black assimilation, black heterosexuality, moral, productive, upstanding, capitalist, black respectability.
Okay, let me just break this down for you. I guess what would properly be translated as quote-unquote black respectability is the idea that I can get off the boat on your island and not be robbed. That's essentially all American tourists want. I've been on several of these little expeditions to these South Islands. I've never once heard someone go, I sure hope there aren't any black homosexuals on shore. It's not a thing. It's just not a thing. You've lost your fucking mind if you think that the sexuality of these nations is designated. The repressive sexuality laws are designated by tourism. White tourists don't give a fuck who you're having sex with. These governments have illegalized them because they think homosexuality leads to crime, leads to white people not wanting to come here. White people don't like going to crime-ridden areas. I'm sorry if other nationalities don't mind it, but most American whites don't want to be involved in crime. Now, this is unfortunate for Barbados if they become a crime-ridden region, but their repressive regime deciding that homosexuality is criminality is their repressive regime's fault.
As mentioned in No More Secrets, No More Lies by Maddie Eudora Richardson.
Go on, find your place in your fucking term paper. You wrote it.
The white male tourist going to these countries expects, as a part of his visit to these islands, to tour not only the geographical landscapes, but also to tour the landscapes of the bodies of local women.
Okay, now this is all well and good, and I understand that there is such a thing as sexual tourism, but the islands aren't really the nations that are famous for it. You'd have to go to places like Southeast Asia to get to that.
Black women in these countries where tourism is a main supporter of the economy are part of the product that the country is selling. assimilated, respectable black people, and black women who are ready to be toured, as claimed in Alexander's text with this quote. In addition, the state moves to police the sexual and reinscribe inherited and more recently constructed meanings of masculinity and femininity, while simultaneously mediating a political economy of desire in tourism that relies upon the sexualization and commodification of women's bodies.
It does not, at all, rely on that. I hate to tell you that, but the concept of the wild native woman or whatever has pretty much burned out in America. And we have plenty of quote-unquote wild native women to choose from in our own countries. They come here all the time, dear. We don't have to commit acts of sexual tourism to get to South American, Central American, and island women. They fill our country. It's not a problem. You seem to view the concepts in a completely sexually obsessed manner, which is just utterly delusional thinking.
However, disability does not become useful to this political economy. Disabled women are neither assimilated and dequeered in the same way that able women are by the policing of sexuality, but are widely considered unsightly, unmarketable, and unappealing. As these disabled people, and in particular disabled women, are not beneficial to the advertising of the country for tourism.
Why is it that you insist that everybody have market value if you're anti-capitalist? This seems very bizarre. I mean, the only solution to your problem appears to be to somehow make disabled people sexy. I mean, that's weird. That's like you want to somehow accidentally breed disability into a culture. What would be the point? We naturally don't want to breed with someone who shows a physical and visible sign of a disability. This person does not make a great sexual partner. I mean, obviously they don't make great advertising for similar reasons. Sex sells. I don't understand why this makes your fifis hurt so bad you had to write a whole fucking midterm about it.
The country performs a sort of Jane Eyre maneuver in which the husband of a disabled woman steps her in the attic for her entire life so as not to damage his own reputation. So to wrap that all up, the treatment of the disabled, although unjustly overlooked by the majority of social justice activists, intersects on many counts with issues involving race, gender, sexuality, and exploitation in capitalism.
No, it doesn't. You desperately want it to. You desperately want this subject to make sense. I don't know how you got it to fit into your little brain, but this concept is not intersectional at all. Disabled black women are no worse off than disabled white women. At all. As someone that worked with people with disabilities, let me tell you, everybody's equally fucked.
I hope to bring light to the urgency of disabled feminism and spread awareness that this is a relevant issue.
Oh, we got a new term! Disabled feminism. If only we could disable feminism, or is feminism already disabled? Is it already mentally retarded? I think feminism's already mentally retarded, but that seems like personal opinion.
In this video, I use materials and theories from Feminist Reflections on the History of Mental Retardation, Autumn 2001 by Lisa Carlson. Not
Well, at least you're using updated text from 2001.
just any body can be a citizen, the politics of law, sexuality, and post-coloniality in Trinidad and Tobago and the Bahamas. Autumn 1994
So back to 1994 for the Trinidad data, that's good.
by M. Jackie Alexander. No More Secrets, No More Lies, African American History and Compulsory Heterosexuality, Autumn 2003 by
Okay, 2003 for that one. God damn, you've got some updated data.
Maddie Eudora Richardson. 4 Reasons that Feminism and Disability Rights are Two Sides of the Same Coin, Autumn 2014 by Sarah Blahovec. Tackling
Well, finally, one from at least modern times, although I imagine that's entirely where you cribbed this essay from.
that troublesome issue of ABA and ethics, Autumn 2012 by Ariana Zurcher.
And that person can kindly fuck off. Because as far as I'm concerned, from my observations of ABA, it is a practice that is A, rarely used, and B, applied properly. Do go on, though. Oh, that was it. You're not even gonna... Okay, fantastic. I obviously hadn't actually previewed that whole thing. That person was an insane person. I don't know what they expect to get from that. As someone that literally just grew up working with these populations, nobody disrespects them, nobody dismisses them as subhuman. Everybody wants them to be good and to be a part of society as much as they possibly can. You simply not accepting the fact that a functioning society cannot be full of mental and physically disabled people. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you about that. It simply cannot be. It simply cannot function. And for you to construe that people of color have it worse off when they're mentally disabled, or that women have it worse off when they're mentally disabled, is an insult to all people with varying degrees of mental disability and physical disability. You've completely fucked up the concepts of your own midterm. And I'm going to post this, and I hope somebody sees it. I hope I can get it to your professor. Because you have completely missed the plot, dear. Well, that's me on my potato laptop, irritated about a regressive feminist. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. My video Wednesdays should be of higher quality.